John Wayne Gacy was not just a seemingly normal businessman, he also had a dark side. Dressed as Pogo the Clown, he appeared at birthday parties and other events, making children both happy and uncomfortable. But underneath the clown makeup and costume was an unimaginable horror that had been going on in his neighborhood for years. John Wayne Gacy, the second of three children of John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Gacy, was born on March 17, 1942 at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago, Illinois. John's childhood was characterized by a difficult relationship with his strict, violent and alcoholic father. He also struggled early on with obesity, heart problems, and regular fainting spells. His father repeatedly accused him of faking his illnesses in order to gain attention. John attended a Catholic school until the age of 11 and then a state school after the family moved. In 1960, at the age of 19, he dropped out of school without graduating. Shortly afterwards, after an argument with his father, John decided to move to Las Vegas, Nevada to work in a funeral parlor. After being suspected of undressing corpses for necrophilia, he returned to Chicago and enrolled in a business school and, after graduating in 1963, got a job at the Nunn-Bush Shoe Company in Springfield, Illinois. During this time, he also joined the JCs, a charity organization to support young business people, and was awarded for his extraordinary commitment after just 3 months in 1964. Although John's first homosexual experience was with an acquaintance, he married his colleague Marlyn Myers in September 1964. He later became manager of an outlet of a clothing company in Springfield and was vice president and man of the year of the JCs. In 1966, he, his wife Marlyn and his son Michael moved to Waterloo, Iowa, where his father-in-law ran KFC restaurants, to work as a manager in one of them. In May 1968, John Wayne Gacy was found guilty of sexually abusing a 15-year-old boy and sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife divorced him as a result. Due to good behavior, he was released after 18 months in prison in June 1970. He returned to Chicago and worked as a cook in a fast food restaurant before starting his own home improvement business in June 1971. At this time, there were also allegations by a 19-year-old who claimed to have been sexually harassed by John Wayne Gacy. However, the case was dropped due to lack of evidence and Gacy's denial of the crime. The businessman moved to the Chicago suburb of Norwood Park with his new girlfriend, Carol Hofgren, and their 2 daughters. He married Carol Hofgren on July 1, 1972. Despite the fact that John had a wife, he could not suppress his penchant for boys and was therefore always on the lookout for victims. On January 2, 1972, his wife Carol was visiting relatives with their daughters when John used the time to drive through the suburbs in his car. There he met 16-year-old Timothy McCoy, who voluntarily followed him home and spent the night there. When John woke up the next morning, McCoy was standing at the bedroom door with a kitchen knife. John jumped from his bed, disarmed McCoy, wrestled him to the floor, and stabbed him in the chest with the kitchen knife. As McCoy lay dying, John discovered that the breakfast table was set for two. John buried McCoy in his crawl space. In January 1974, John allegedly committed his second murder. He strangled the victim, who could not be identified, and placed him in his closet before burying him. On July 31, 1975, John met 17-year-old John Butkovich. John Butkovich, who was his co-worker, went to talk to John about his overdue wages. At John's house, he offered him something to drink. Later, John tied his hands behind his back and sat on his chest until he strangled him. Despite his prison sentence, John Wayne Gacy was popular in his community and organized annual summer parties attended by politicians and others. He also regularly appeared at fundraisers and parades as the self-created character Pogo the Clown. After his marriage ended in March 1976, the series of murders began. 1 month after finalizing his divorce, John kidnapped and murdered 18-year-old Daryl Sampson. He was last seen on April 6, 1976. He buried him under the dining room. A month later, 15-year-old Randall Reffett disappeared after a dentist appointment, and 14-year-old Samuel Stapleton disappeared on the same day. Investigators say both were murdered and buried the same evening. On June 3, John Wayne Gacy killed 17-year-old Michael Bonin, who was abducted while traveling from Chicago to Waukegan and then strangled with a ligature. 10 days later, he murdered 16-year-old William Carroll, who was the first of 4 known victims murdered between June 13 and August 6, 1976. Some of the victims have not been identified, including 2 men killed between August and October 1976. On October 24, John also abducted and killed teenage friends Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino, who were last seen on Clark Street in Chicago. 2 days later, 19-year-old William Bundy, who worked for John's company, disappeared. In December, 17-year-old Gregory Godzik disappeared. He had previously informed his family that John needed him to dig in his crawl space. When Gregory's family contacted John about the disappearance, he claimed that Gregory had expressed a desire to run away from home. On January 20, John lured 19-year-old John SZYC to his home under the pretense of buying his Plymouth Satellite. He later strangled him and sold John SZYC's car for $300. 2 months later, 20-year-old John Prestige, who had previously mentioned that he had gotten work with a local contractor, disappeared. In the spring of 1977, he murdered another unidentified teenager. His next victim was Matthew Bowman, who had last been seen by his mother at the suburban train station to travel to Harwood Heights for a court appearance. In late 1977, John killed 6 more young men between the ages of 16 and 21. Among them were year-old Robert Gilroy, John Mowry, Russell Nelson, Robert Winch, Tommy Bowling, David Talsma. On December 30, 1977, another example occurred that illustrated the brutality of John Wayne Gacy. John abducted 19-year-old college student Robert Donnelly from a bus stop at gunpoint. They then drove to his home where John raped, tortured and drowned him in a bathtub to unconsciousness. Donnelly is said to have told him to kill him because he was in so much pain. But after a few hours he released him and warned him not to go to the police. But 6 days later he did just that. In an interview, John admitted to having had a sex-slave relationship with him. The police believed John and did not press charges. The series of murders continued in 1978. 19-year-old William Kindred disappeared on February 16 after telling his fiancée that he was going to a bar. On March 21, he lured 26-year-old Jeffrey Rignall into his car. There he drugged him with an anesthetic, drove him to his house and strapped his arms, head and feet to a device to rape and torture him with instruments such as lighted candles. John later threw him into Chicago's Lincoln Park, unconscious but alive. He survived and informed the police about the attack, whereupon John stood trial for assault. By mid-1978, John had no more room for more bodies and decided to throw his next bodies off the I-55 bridge into the river. Only 4 were ever recovered. Among them were Timothy O'Rourke, Frank Landingin, and James Mazzara. On the afternoon of December 11, 1978, John Wayne Gacy visited a pharmacy. When he noticed that 15-year-old Robert Piest was within earshot, he communicated to the store owner of the pharmacy that his company was hiring teenagers for $5 an hour. That same evening, Robert went to see John to talk to him about a job. Around 10 p.m., John put the rope around his neck and killed him. When Robert Piest did not return, his family filed a missing persons report with the police. Knowing full well that John must have been the one who offered him the job, the pharmacy owner reported it to the police. At the police station, John denied any involvement in Robert Piest's disappearance and mentioned that he had received a call from the pharmacy that evening, because he had left his appointment book in the store and had therefore returned to the pharmacy. But the owner of the pharmacy could not agree to this, whereupon a search of John's house was ordered. Incriminating evidence was seized, including a pistol, handcuffs, books on homosexuality, underwear that was too small for him, and cannabis. The police were on his trail, but he was still at large. On the evening of December 20th, Gacy drove to his lawyer's office to allegedly discuss his civil suit. There, under the influence of alcohol, he confessed that he had been responsible for at least 30 murders, burying most of the victims in the floor of his house and dumping some in the river. He pejoratively described his victims as male prostitutes and claimed that they were his property. During the confession, Gacy fell asleep drunk, then woke up and left the office despite his lawyer's revelations. He visited friends, passed cannabis, and predicted his end was near. When they went to arrest John Wayne Gacy for drug possession to get a second warrant, John's basement was flooded. They still found what they were looking for and already suspected: bodies. The bodies they found were decomposed and partially unrecognizable. Initially, John denied having killed 15-year-old Robert Piest, who was already wanted, but later he gave in. He confessed to killing around 30 young men who had allegedly come to his house voluntarily. Gacy also confessed to luring and murdering Robert Piest by strangling him and then throwing his body into the river. On December 23, police, attorneys and his oldest sister accompanied John to the I-55 bridge, where he stated he threw the body of Robert Piest and 4 other victims into the river. They then drove to his home, where he was to mark where he had allegedly killed and buried a person named John Butkovich in self-defense. Gacy drew a rough sketch of his basement to help find the bodies. In all, 26 bodies were found in his basement and 3 more on his property. When the floors and walls were dismantled, further evidence was discovered, such as ID cards. On February 6, 1980, John Wayne Gacy's trial began in Chicago. The defense failed with the claim that he was mentally ill, and the theory of accidents caused by sexual asphyxia was also rejected. Gacy made macabre jokes during the trial, for example that his only crime was running a cemetery without a license. On March 13, he was found guilty and received 21 life sentences and 12 death sentences. On May 10, 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center, after having a picnic with his family and meeting with a priest. His last words are said to have been, "Kiss my ass." Media coverage and interest drew about 1,000 spectators to the prison, mostly in favor of the execution. A few protested with a string of lights. There were sales of Gacy merchandise, which was criticized as being in poor taste. The execution initially had problems with the injection, had to be interrupted and later repeated. The lead prosecutor of the Gacy trial commented that Gacy still had an easier death than his victims. The crowd applauded when John Wayne Gacy was officially pronounced dead. The life and crimes of John Wayne Gacy are a terrible reminder of the depths of human nature. His arrest and subsequent execution in 1994 triggered a mixture of shock and horror. Gacy's double life as a serial killer left a dark scar on history that has shaken society to its core. That's it for this video. Feel free to write your thoughts about this story in the comments. If you liked the video, please leave a like and subscribe to support me for free. Thank you for watching.